Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, Mexico's planned telecom overhaul is firing up activists who say the reforms don't go far enough to improve information access. So what do they want? Malika Bilal is off on vacation, so I have to say hola to Omar Bidar. He is our guest digital producer. Habla Español?
Not really.
Uh-oh.
Terrible. Barely know a couple words.
How are you going to cope?
We'll try to keep. Yeah, we'll see how what I can do to pull through.
What do you got for us?
Well, we actually have one of our guests today is from this group Yo Soy Red, which means I Am Network, and it's one of the groups that have put out a video about why people are involved in this protest. So take a listen to this.
Okay.
This new law puts network neutrality at risk, since the proposal gives telecommunication access providers the ability to block and discriminate against content and network communication protocols. Can you imagine a pay-per-view internet? We can't either. This is censorship. This is an attack on freedom of speech. And this law seems to target what our president's headache seems to be since the beginning of his regime: social networks and the way we organize through them.
So this video has about 500,000 hits, and it gives you a sense of some of the passionate responses that we have seen come out of this, including many tweets and comments. Of course, for those of you at home, you can be part of this conversation by tweeting in using the hashtag you see on your screen right now, AJStream.
So the stream is only as dynamic as our community, which means you. So we would love you to join in our conversation by liking us on our Facebook page and also adding your comments. Just go to facebook.com/AJStream and tell us what stories make you tick.
Hi, my name is Lucas de Aragão. I'm a political analyst from Brazil, Arco Advice, Brazil's leading public affairs and political analysis company, and I'm in the stream.
Mexico's planned overhaul of the telecom industry has caused such public anger that lawmakers have postponed debate on the controversial bill until June. Thousands marched through the streets of Mexico City this weekend, stretching a human chain from near the president's home to the Senate, and that's where the controversial legislation is being drafted. Critics say it will censor the internet and tighten government control over information. The bill is part of President Enrique Peña Nieto's unprecedented move to restructure the telecom industry. He says he wants to balance information freedom with national security and break up media monopolies in the process. So why are some Mexicans upset? Today we examine the country's media landscape. With us to help us do this, we have in Mexico City Oscar Mondragon of Internet para Todos, or Internet for All, activist Primavera Tejas Giron of the group Yo Soy Red, and the Mexican Association of the Right to Information. In Washington, we have Jesus Esquivel. He is correspondent for Mexico's Proceso newspaper. And on set, we have Rick Rockwell, director of American University's International Media Program and host of Latin Pulse Radio. So it is great to have you all here in the stream. I'm going to start on Twitter. Have a look at my laptop. I looked up hashtag Cadena Humana. That is human chain. Look at some of the pictures that have been posted in the last 48 hours and you get a sense of what's been going on in the streets in Mexico over the last couple of days. So let me go back to Oscar. Oscar, you were probably here in the Cadena Humana, that human chain. What were you trying to do over the weekend?
Well, we had this large demonstration, the Cadena Humana. There were approximately 5,000 people on the street, and we took each other by our hands, and this extended from Televisa, this media company, all the way to the presidential house, which is about 7 kilometers, and it was a fantastic thing. It was really great to see all these people holding hands together and asking government to stop these new regulations that they're trying to push in Congress.
So what's the big deal about the telecom bill? It sounded like there were some reforms that needed to be done. Why do you not like it?
Basically because it attacks basic guarantees that are protected by the Constitution, like freedom of speech. That's an important one. and also net neutrality, which might not be in the Mexican Constitution, but it should. In the first place, they had this attack on freedom of speech by allowing government to suspend telecommunication services by region or by service or whatever they wanted without any judicial or Congress oversee.
Right.
And we thought, that's basically the mark of authoritarian government, and we don't want that.
All right. Rick, I see you nodding.
I'm nodding because this is this issue of trust. Mexicans don't want to go backwards in time. This issue of the federal government, the all-powerful presidency and federal government is what Mexicans had up until about the year 2000. So this current generation of activists and others don't want that 14 years to go backwards.
Okay, so Primavera, this whole decision has been pushed back to June. Is that mission accomplished? Are you happy?
We are not happy. We just made it that it was huge and it was global. But first of all, I want to say thank you to Alberto Escorcia. He's the blogger of Yo Soy Red. And also the young people of the Mexican state of Guadalajara, especially two groups, Más de 131 y Teso and Yo Soy Red, Yo Soy 132 Guadalajara, they were the seed that started this global call. So we started this global call calling for internet because it was something that was very easy to see that was against our freedom of expression. But now we are in the second instance, and as you said, this human chain was against Televisa's power, and this is very important because we have this monopoly in television, and this is a very, very tough problem that we have. We don't have any other information in television, so all these issues and all these human chain, and all these things that are happening about the telecommunications bill that our president Enrique Peña Nieto sent is totally this discussion did not exist. In television, we don't have this discussion. That's why it's very important the symbolism of this chain from Televisa's headquarters to the presidential residency. It's just to show how people is upset of this thing we have from the beginning, this relation between the president and these television moguls.
All right, Primavera, our audience, online community also joining in the conversation. Omar?
Yeah, we have this comment here on Facebook from Guadalupe who says, the Mexican middle class is waking up. We are fed up with the priestas game. Those are people who support the ruling party. We will not leave. This was reflected yesterday in the chain formed hand to hand, and we still have some dignity. And we also have this footage right here from Vine of people destroying their old TV sets in protest of this proposed law. But Oscar, given the fact that this has been pushed to June, it's going to be very difficult to sustain continuous protests for an extended period of time. So what essentially is next?
Well, the thing is, now there are a lot of people, including me, that think that all this was basically a charade. It was just a simulation to have society respond to these very urgent things and these very dangerous things that the government planned to do, while at the same time the legislation does not contain any provisions to contain or curtail monopolies. And that is something which is not even in the debate. Nobody is even talking about that, but it's there. They actually made this promise prior to the end of this process. They made this promise that they would remove everything related to the internet. So, I think it was a choreography, and I think it was going well. Something happened in the middle. They sent the debate. Everything is going to happen in June, according to what they're saying. But in the meantime, what we have to do as citizens is keep insisting, keep pushing for the removal of these restrictions on freedom and of expression and the liberty to use the internet.
All right.
And
I want to share with our audience, just take a breath for a moment there, Oscar. Share with our audience something that Primavera alluded to, which is monopolies. So this is the television market share. Have a look at this. So Televisa that Primavera mentioned is owned
Yes.
by Emilio Azcárraga, and Emilio owns 70%, and then TV Azteca owns about 29%, and then there's 1% maybe others. So that is problematic, right, Primavera?
Yes, that is very problematic.
What does that
And
mean?
you know,
If I'm watching TV as a Mexican, what does that mean to my TV viewing?
that you're going to see all the soap operas and all the news shows about Televisa and TV Azteca, and all these issues that we're discussing today, they are television, you know? So this is a big problem. Also, we have other problem because in the law, they gave more money for these television moguls, you know? We have like official propaganda. And this official propaganda is from the government, from the federal government.
Explain to us what you mean by that exactly. What are you talking about here?
We, for example, broadcast some propaganda from the federal government, from the presidency, and from other states. So we have to pay for that propaganda when we have in the law some spaces that are for free because this is the space of television and for broadcasters. But, for example, in this first instance of the government of Peña Nieto, they have spent more than $30 million in that propaganda.
Okay.
So imagine if that money go to public media, it's going to be great, but they use propaganda. You know?
All right. So Jesus, jump in. I can see you want to.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I just want to comment on the monopoly to explain to the people what is exactly the news that we get from Televisa every night. There is no many options for people who live outside Mexico City in the rural areas. What they get is what the government want them to get. In other words, you only will see good news on the economy. This human change will not exist tonight in the broadcast of Televisa or its news hour. So that means they trying to get the people like living in a country that don't exist. It's a fantasy. It's the TV government commercial, as Primavera mentioned.
So
Never
Jesus, is it possible to get away with only doing good news on the economy when you actually have the internet and everybody can just check online to see what's really happening? How do you get away with that?
Well, you know, they are very tricky. You can get the Secretary of the Treasury in an interview exclusive telling the people, don't worry, everything is fine. And if they believe, the owner of Televisa and the government believe, if they don't broadcast the human change on TV, it controls 70%, as you mentioned on the graphic. Nobody's going to believe that the people were outside on the streets in this human change. That's manipulation by a network, and it has been for many, many years. That's why Professor Rockwell was mentioned that this kind of protest is a step forward for a democracy. But with this government of Enrique Peña Nieto, we are giving a step back. Can you believe that in this kind of democracies now in Latin America, Mexico is trying to censorship the internet? It's unbelievable.
If I could add just some background to that, because there's a Mexican author, Paco Ignacio Taibo II, who often says, to paraphrase him, if it doesn't happen on Mexican TV, it did not happen. And so this is the reality of the Mexican context, in that you don't have Mexico connected to the internet like Brazil is, or like Argentina, or other parts of Latin America. And so still large swaths of the country, television is the medium. Radio is still also very important in Mexico, and we also see these monopoly owners who have cross ownership in both radio and in television. And just to give you some further context, the Azcárraga family, we're in the third generation of them owning Televisa and being a voice for the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI. And so that particular party, the current owner, his father, who's now deceased, used to say proudly that he was a soldier for the PRI, that he was someone who was an activist for that particular party. And that up until 2000, the Mexican government and the PRI were almost inseparable, that the party represented the government and the government represented the party. Now, some Mexicans, I think many here, fear that with these particular reforms, there's a sense of trying to go back to those bad old days.
So we have people actually who are joining in. Just 1 second, we'll be right to you, Oscar, with this one. We have people who are actually weighing in on social media right now on this very particular point. Ricardo just tweeted in a couple of minutes ago saying that telecom reform in Mexico perpetuates a lack of diversity in the media landscape, same voices, same outlets, same sources. And we have Vipul here who says if they can just do away with monopoly, it can immensely help the common man in Mexico. Now, Oscar, I know the president has actually said that he is interested in tackling monopoly, but given his closeness with some of the conglomerates, do you buy that this is a sincere promise, essentially, or effort on his part?
I think that there's a very clear divorce between discourse and action, because they had a fantastic chance this time to end telecommunications monopolies. We've been talking about Televisa, but you have also to take into account that Telmex, Telcel, Slim's companies have a monopoly over telecommunications. They have 80% of all internet connections, and 80% of all, 70% of all cellular telephone lines, and 80% of all landlines. So what that means basically is that we end up having some of the most expensive services in the OECD, some of the lowest speeds according to companies like Netflix, and they have this opportunity because in the constitutional reform of last year, they introduced the ability of the regulator to impose a number of measures that would have been effective. But with this reform that they are sending, they are not addressing any of these measures. They're not doing anything about it. So I think that in the end, we're gonna end exactly where we started. And that is something which the PRI has done fantastically well over the years. They do promote changes, but they never promote change.
All right, Oscar, take a breath for a moment. Let me just show you what your president said just quite recently. He's putting down this telecommunications legislation as it's about the economy. So our entrepreneurs should have access to quality. Have a look here. There you go. Telecommunications with rates competitive on an international level. And that's precisely the commitment from the government and the Republic. I am certain that this commitment is also shared by the legislators who are currently working in the secondary laws of this reform. So Rick, I mean, you look at the whole of Latin America. Does this make sense in terms of development for Mexico, that you have to have a telecommunications legislation reform in order for Mexico to do well economically?
If you take the president's words on their face, yes, it makes sense.
Right.
And much of what he has been saying does make sense, but it does come back to that issue of trust. Mexicans are not sure whether they trust this particular president. His ratings are lower than many Mexican presidents at this particular stage in their presidency. And so I think he is making business sense. But I think Mexicans are worried about the Trojan horse effect. What special deals have been cut behind the scenes, because this is the way that Mexican telecom has tended to work. And so is this a way for Televisa then to be cut into the phone deal? Is this a way for Carlos Slim, who owns Telcel and Mexican Telecom in a large sense, to get him into the television game? So not really increasing the voices, we're just cutting deals between the voices that already exist.
I did anticipate that Carlos Slim would make an appearance in this conversation, so I popped him up here on my laptop. Carlos Slim is the second wealthiest man in the entire world. He is the most wealthiest man in the whole of Latin America, and he owns 70% of telecommunications in Mexico right now. Omar, where do you want to take us next?
We actually have a lot of people who are weighing in on concerns about essentially what scheme could be in play that's going to try to divert the attention of protesters from what really matters. We have Louise here on Facebook who says, perhaps the president has strategically included very extreme measures in the bill so he can make some concessions but then still pass much of that law without criticism. But we also have Rodrigo here with a video comment. Take a listen to this.
Telecommunications reform in Mexico sadly bypassed the democratic process, and had it not been for the pressure exerted by social network users, the very social networks the government wants to block, very dangerous pieces of legislation could be introduced, such as blocking the internet during protests and also tapping into users' communications without a judge warrant. It is very important to make the world aware of these dangers.
So, Primavera, one of the concerns that were raised in that comment is essentially the ability to protest anything in the future. Essentially, that if you restrict people's ability to organize on social media, this isn't just about these particular laws that some might find objectionable. Do you agree that the stakes are the country's ability to object to anything that could be proposed in the future?
No, not. We are not. We don't like that because they said that. Well, it was, for example, the Ministry of Communications, Ignacio Peralta. He had a conversation with a very famous for the young people webpage of a news webpage, and they were asking to him how they were thinking about blocking these places, and he said, and he answered, well, we are thinking about blocking places because maybe it's going to be like a kidnapping, or maybe it's going to be like a rumor of poisoned water, and we have to block the communications. And then we laugh because we say, well, first of all, when is going to be a particular moment and for national security purpose to block the communications.
Right.
There, it's not clear. And the second thing, if there is a rumor or for something, well, you as a government, you go out and block this rumor, but not blocking the communications, you know. And if there is a rumor of poisoned water, well, you don't block the communications because people is going to be poisoned. So you see what is the label of the discussion of our Ministry of Communications? It's awful.
Okay. All right. So we're running out of time very quickly here. Thank goodness we have a post show so we can go online. I want to show you something here on my laptop. It says, Ahora nosotros damos las noticias. Now we give the news. So let me end up with Jesus here. There are ways to work around this situation that you have in Mexico right now, where monopolies have a lot of power, where the power is concentrated with just a few people. How are you working around it?
Well, like in my case, my magazine, Proceso, sometimes we publish articles criticizing the government of Enrique Peña Nieto, and the magazine it's on the stands, and for some reason disappear. Everybody's buying the whole bunch of magazines in the morning, in the middle of the day, but we have now the internet. Our page, it's very popular in Mexico. That's how we go along all this censorship. What worries me is this time that the Mexican Congress is having until June.
Right.
I really believe that the PRI and the PAN are going to work in a bill.
Okay, and these are political parties in Mexico, just for our international audience. Yes.
And they're going to craft a bill that is going to give tools to the government to censor. Believe me, I don't trust Enrique Peña Nieto for this case, and even the PRI and the PIN, they are all actually working in a bill that is going to be a really hard attack to the freedom of expression in Mexico.
All right, we don't know that for sure, but that is the opinion of Jesus Esquivel. You will also hear from Primavera Tellez Giron, Oscar Mondragon, and also Rick Rockwell. They will bring in their take, their expertise to our post show at stream.aljazeera.com, as we talk about the media landscape in Mexico. Omar.
We have one thought here on Twitter about somebody's take on how powerful the media is in Mexico. He says, Peña Nieto was imposed by Televisa as president of Mexico, and the only way to express our disagreement are on social networks, and that's what they want to censor. That is Israel on Twitter.
All right, we're going to our own social network in just a moment, but first a preview of the next AJ stream. What would happen to the European Union if its parliament was full of far-right Eurosceptics? We look at the upcoming European Parliament elections at a time when ultra-nationalist parties are doing really well in the polls. Until then, we'll see you online. Thanks for watching.
Yes.
That's what I'm really. Hello there, welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show. I'm Femi OK, here with a group of Mexican media experts discussing the country's telecom landscape. Well, I started with Oscar in the main show. Oscar, Jesus ended with a very negative take on what might happen between now and June. Could you not potentially see it as that's more room, that's more space for you and the campaign to persuade legislators to come over to your way of thinking?
Well, I think that a lot has been said already about these issues, and it's going to be very hard for the government to go through with these measures. For example, with this thing about being able to block, inhibit, or annul temporarily the signals of communication, Mexico is the signee of the Joint Declaration of Internet Freedom of Expression, which is Organization of American States document, and there's a Latin America or an American Human Rights Court. So it'd be extremely difficult for government to put these laws through.
Right.
Again, I believe that all along they didn't intend them to go through. They were just a distractor. We all fell into it, and what follows now.
You included, though, Oscar, right? You fell into it too, right? You were out there organizing.
Excuse me?
Yeah, you too. If you're saying that this was a plot all along or a plan all along, you too took the bait, right?
Absolutely. I mean, because it was really dangerous. It was impossible not to do anything. I mean, once we saw these legislation coming, we had to mobilize. We had to tell people, go out to the streets and tell your legislators not to do it. But I think that...
but Oscar, I'm seeing some success. Do you know what? I'm seeing some success in what you've done. Access to the internet as a human right. That's remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, that's in the UN documents, and it's also in the Mexican Constitution. It's not a human right, but it's a right of every Mexican to have internet access.
Right.
So, you know, all those provisions are not going to go through.
Okay.
Again, what I'm thinking is that people need to start telling the legislators that the problem is with monopolies and that something has to be done with that.
All right, Omar.
So we have Contra El Silencio here on Twitter, who just tweeted in saying, the main issue with the telecom bill is that it gives more power to those that already have it and reduces chances for alternative media. But speaking of alternative media that we were just looking at, Brian also tweeted in saying, social media and online blogs are fundamental, mainstream media is unreliable, but only 30% of the population has access to the internet. So Rick, to what extent is this a pre-existing problem even before this law has come about?
This is a huge problem, and we saw the Mexican government a generation ago use the same rhetoric that they're using now. During the Salinas administration, they said, look, there's only Televisa. We will open up the TV area, and what they ended up creating was a duopoly. But what people didn't realize at the time, the same way that we're seeing this happen, is that the alternative television media ended up also being a supporter of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. And so
how would that look if I was watching Mexican TV? How would I understand that?
Well, I think in watching television with Mexicans, and our Mexican panel can really discuss this. I've often asked, if you know that the government is speaking to you directly through the TV and lying to you nightly, why do you watch those things? Why don't you go to alternative places like Proceso or other places? And Mexicans watch TV because they want to know what the government is saying so they can try to figure it out. Okay. But then in the word of mouth and the other types of communication that happens, that's how the country comes to some sort of consensus about where it's going. But I'm not sure that that's a good way to support a burgeoning democracy. And that's what you really want. In democracy, and we have Mexicans here who want to talk about that now.
All right.
Primavera wants to talk about that, and I think in a democracy you want to have as many voices as possible represented to be able to do what's
let's have that many voices as possible. Primavera, and then Jesus, I know you had something to add. So Primavera, you start.
And also, we have another big problem. In this monopoly, and also we don't have public media, because public media in here is government media, you know. So this media is talking about what fabulous is Enrique Peña Nieto and how fabulous are the governors of the different states. So imagine that kind of voices. There are no voices of the citizens, even community radios, and never you can speak about indigenous radios or indigenous media. You know, they don't have any money to subsist because all the government put all this money to Televisa. So it's that another big problem.
Jesus, what did you want to add?
Well, there is another factor, impunity. And in Mexico is a lot of impunity for any reasons. I'm going to give you an example. To be a journalist in Mexico is really, really dangerous. A lot of journalists have been killed in the last few years. In the case of Proceso, my colleague has been, actually today is 2 years since he was killed in Veracruz. And nothing has happened. And I know, for some reasons, and I'm very sure on this, that the government is always watching you, especially if you are an independent journalist. Your phone, you hear, when you're talking to your sources, you hear little sounds like click, click, like they are recording what you're saying. And I believe this government is really, really working hard with the Mexican Congress to create a bill that for some people is going to be a censorship. I'm not saying it's the whole thing, the whole bill, but at the end they're going to have something that we are not going to agree on it. And I really will be happy to see the young people on the streets against protesting of this government of Enrique Peña Nieto that is not good for my country.
If I could add to...
I want to add something.
Let Primavera speak.
Is saying. And good example of what is happening in Mexico with all this movement in internet, we have an ally that it's a web page that all the young people use to look and to post and to look around this news. It's called Sopitas. So they continue to publishing everything against this bill. So what was the response of the president? They called them to the presidential residency to tell them why they are doing this. No? And they have this big problem. Imagine a democracy. It's not a democracy when the president is calling you to ask you, why are you telling these things? And well, they are telling the truth, and they were helping us to making the video and everything. So you can imagine that this is a democracy. This is not a democracy.
All right, Rick.
So this government intimidation is very typical as part of the culture of the PRI to control things. It's not a direct censorship, it's an indirect censorship and pressure that goes back generations in Mexico. And I think we should note that if you look at the Committee to Protect Journalists and their listings of dangerous countries, Mexico has been on and off that list for a very long time because of this sort of atmosphere of impunity. I just one other historic fact that may go to what Omar was asking about.
Make it
context.
good. You have the last word, Rick.
Okay,
Rockwell.
so the last word is Proceso started because it was a rebellion against government control of the newspaper industry in Mexico. So this is a history that goes back a long way about culture and government control.
This conversation could go on for another hour. I would love to spend another hour with Jesus and Primavera and Oscar and Rick, but I have to wrap it up. But I know we're all on social media, so we will continue online. #AJStream is the hashtag you need. Omar.
We have just a couple of closing tweets of people who disagree with each other here. We have Akash here who says, Mr. Nieto is changing the rules of the game in Mexico. He is essentially saying to monopolist billionaires, either compete or perish. So he seems to trust in that reform message. On the other hand, we have Gustavo here who says, no, this is a battle between the ruling party and the president on the one hand and the citizens of Mexico on the other.
We'll be watching with interest and check back in June. Now, a preview of our next AJ Stream show. What would happen if the European Union, if their parliament was full of far-right Eurosceptics? we look at the upcoming European Parliament elections at a time when ultra-nationalist parties are doing really well in the polls. We will hear from some of them on the next AJ stream. Until then, thanks for watching. Take care.